Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Midwestern Mark stream. I'm here with Carlos on this. What day is it today? Is it Wednesday or Thursday? It's Thursday. On this
It's Thursday.
Thursday, January 26th, late night impromptu stream. I've got my communist hat on. Red for the proletariat and M for Marx. So yeah, excited to be here. How's it going, Carlos?
It's going really good. I've been looking forward to streaming for a while, and I'm glad that we were both able to coordinate a good time for both of us. But there's a lot to talk about. It's a very volatile time in the world, and one of the news that we hope to cover today is how the doomsday clock it's closest to midnight than it's ever been. So it's a very good time to bring these topics up and to talk about the proxy wars that the U.S. is waging against Russia and potentially against China and Taiwan. But yeah, everything's going good. We just started our semester. I'm guessing that you're in a similar boat. So um, yeah, I got back to teaching this week, and it's always nice to cover the history of philosophy. That's actually something that we talked about, whether it would be a good idea for me to do like segments on the history of philosophy for Midwestern Marx, but from like a Marxist perspective, kind of like what Alan Woods has done, the Trot author, what he's done for in a book form, perhaps doing that in terms of classes. But my thing is that there's so many important things to talk about that to sit down and talk and educate people on Plato is like, that might be my 35th concern for people to be educated on. There's so many other things that I think are more important today, but it is fun as hell.
For sure. Yeah, it's a great idea. It's just hard to prioritize, our time and our energy and what we put stuff into. I've been wanting to do more streams because we've been more consistent with the streams, and that's been bringing up the viewership. But I realized that my origins of the family, private property, in the state, like reading guide, just has one episode or two episodes sitting up on our channel, and I'm like,
Mm.
I gotta finish this. Like, I feel like the use value and breaking down that book for people is really high. So it takes a lot of effort, but it's a valuable pursuit. But then now that's taken 2-3 days of all my free time, working on that. Um, so yeah, it's a constant struggle of finding where to put our time and energy, which is why, if you're like a video editor or someone who wants to help us out with stuff like that at Midwestern Marks, please shoot us an email at midwesternmarks@gmail.com.
Yeah, and also for like intro videos, man, we could definitely use like a nice cool intro video that's got like the international or something and a good mix of videos in there. And um, yeah, so if you part of being an institute is that we're always looking for people who can participate and help, whether that's with writing um, or designs or anything. So if you're interested in helping us and in working with us, definitely do reach out. But your guide to Engels' text is so good. Um, you've really like fired up that text because I feel like you read it maybe 3 times in a row because you read it and
I
then you
think
read
this is
it.
my fourth time.
Yeah. You read it to teach the Patreon, and then you read it to prepare the first 2 ones, and now you're going back at it, and it's so good. I remember I was talking to Tom about what might be a good next book for one of his series. He gets certain Marxist books and he breaks them down and contextualizes them, and he wanted to do uh, the origins of the family, private property, and state. And I was like, that would be good. Check out the videos that Eddie's done on it. And he thought they were so good that it would just remove the purpose of him doing his series. So it definitely is a good idea to get that finished. He's doing one on Engels's Ludwig Feuerbach and the Outcome of Classical German Philosophy, which is a nice short little text. He just sent in the first installment for that, so that should be published soon.
Huh, that's an awesome. I mean, that's an honor to hear Tom say that. I didn't know that. But now I'm gonna have to, because in the first two Origins videos, I like took the time to make like graphic explainers of all of the changes in the family form and the state and stuff that's going on. So
Yeah.
if Tom thought those were good, now I'm going to have to keep making those throughout the whole series, which is going to be a lot of extra work for me, but it'll be worth it. Also, I can fly through the book now because it's like my fourth time reading it.
Yeah.
So I'm, getting a lot of comprehension, in pulling things from it that I, had maybe missed before.
Yeah, it's so good to reread. There's some books that after you read the first chapter, you should not even consider continuing. It's okay to put books down when you feel like they're not valuable. There's other books that you read them once and you're like, I got the most important parts of this. I've marked it up. I'm going to come back to it maybe in writing, but rereading perhaps is not the best idea. And then there's other books where you can spend your whole life rereading them, and every time you will get something new. And I think that Engels' text is one of those. Obviously, Capital, and for me, Hegel. And these are texts that, when I'm in the middle of, in the sort of interregnum between research projects, I pick up random stuff. And usually the random stuff is like rereading the same stuff that's like really, really important. And I always notice something new, or and am able to focus in on the same thing from a different angle, and it enriches the process of knowing the text.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had that experience with Capital after reading it a couple times. Capital Volume 2, I got like a little more than a third of the way through it and then restarted at a point. Now I'm pretty well over halfway. And yeah, like you said, each time you learn something new. Like now going back, and I've been reading Capital Volume 2 again, and the Grundrisse and Origin, so I got to freaking choose one. I think I'll probably finish Capital 2 Volume 2 before I go back to the Grundrisse, just because reading the Grundrisse made me want to finish Volume 2. But regardless, after studying healthcare and healthcare administration, I was looking at the circulation of capital through like a whole new lens, because I've studied the economics of healthcare and the accounting of healthcare, which, capital is basically like, it's almost like a work of accounting, or like theory of accounting. Like, how do we measure and interpret value? And how do we understand how value is changed and how value becomes profit or surplus value? So if you look, like in the modern field of healthcare administration, the way they study revenue cycles and the way that corporations make profit and make money, they're explaining to a T the same circuit of capital, the circuit of industrial capital that Marx explains in Capital Volumes 1 and 2, and talking about the production of surplus value. So like David Harvey actually says that in his breakdown of capital. He's taught the book 40 times, and every time he does it with a different group of people. He'll do it with like anthropologists, and then he does it with people who are like, English majors or whatever, and they always bring a new perspective, a new point of view from their own field. And, they all learn something different from that book, because capital, applies to everything in a capitalist society. So, everybody can come at it with their own perspective and learn unique things, and if you read the book now and then you read it 5 years later, you yourself are going to bring a new perspective the second time you read it, as well as understanding it better. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And those books are just timeless. Yeah.
It's a real shame that they're unfinished. And we don't treat them as manuscripts, but in reality, they kind of are. They're not manuscripts in the same way that the Grundrisse manuscripts are, but they were put together by Engels. And I mean, Marx publishes the first volume in 1967. He dies in 1983, so he had maybe more than enough time so that if he felt that volume 1 was genuinely finished, he could have moved on to the other ones and finished those. But he kept on trying to like refine volume one. And towards the end of his life, the volume of Capital that he was still working on was volume one of Capital. I think he was working on a third version of an English, a German edition, a third German edition of Capital. And he spent some time. There was a person that translated big chunks of it to French. And when the guy sent him the the draft, Marx thought it was a mess. So in the process of him fixing that translation, there was new things that he was able to add. And so it's pretty crazy because like even the volume that is finished is kind of unfinished, or at least for Marx it was still kind of unfinished. He was still developing it. And I wonder whether it could ever be the sort of project that is finished, just because it's analyzing a totality and movement, which is capitalist production as a whole. And insofar as it continues moving, there's always areas that you can refine and concretize in light of what certain analysis from 2 years ago unfolded into. It makes it difficult. I do agree with the comment that some people have made in the past, which is that to fully and comprehensively understand like the first volume, you need to see how it unfolds into the second and third one. And it's a comment that might sound audacious to people because they look at the first volume and they're like, okay, this is a fairly big book. And then if someone tells them like, hey, and if you really want to understand this, you have to read these other two really big books. That's kind of messed up. It's like Lenin, saying that if you want to understand Capital, you have to understand the whole of Hegel's Science of Logic. But it's there's a certain truth to that that's almost commonsensical. Like if you want to know the first part of The Godfather in the best form possible, it is genuinely accepted that you would have to watch the trilogy, so that you can know what the developments in that first movie unfold into. And it's the same thing with Capital. Like you can understand the categories that appear in the first volume, but you understand them in a much more refined and comprehensive and integrated fashion when you see what they unfold into in volume 2, and then what those unfold into in volume 3. And those that are later on are there not because it's arbitrarily just assembled in whatever form. They're there because in order to understand those, you need to understand all the ones that come before that. So there's a logic to the development of Capital that I think it's important to follow. And not that it's wrong to just read the first one or like work on themes that are within the first one if people haven't read the other ones, but it should always be kept in mind that a more refined analysis is always going to come about reading the whole, which is itself incomplete. But
yeah, absolutely. It's interesting reading the Grundrisse and seeing what Marx actually had planned, for Capital. He had 5 or 6 volumes, or, at some points like 8 or 9 volumes planned out. His plan changed with time, but I was thinking too, reading the Grundrisse, like he lays sort of the basis for capitalist crises, really in volume 2 and volume one as well. I haven't read volume 3 yet, obviously, but he lays the sort of material basis for what creates crises. But he had planned this 4th or 5th volume that would focus on crises specifically, right? And that would lay out the different kinds of capitalist crises and how they work. And we've been talking to Radhika Desai and Alan Freeman lately, and that's a lot of what Radhika has been doing in her work, is detailing, concretizing what are the different forms of crisis, how do they function and what are their effects, how are monetary crises unique from other kinds of crises, which is something Marx wanted to do. So it shows that there's a lot that still to be explored and still to be expanded on when it comes to understanding capitalism and expanding Marx's analysis. And like you said, capitalism is always changing, so the analysis will always change as well. And another one that Marx wanted to write, which I see Jacob talking about the German ideology, which he's reading right now in the chat. The German ideology is sort of like the closest thing we have to Marx and Engels explaining their conception of the dialectic versus Hegel's, even though, the German ideology was never supposed to be published. It's like a collection of notebooks and whatever. But Marx had plans, to do this full explanation of here's the Marxist dialectic versus the Hegelian dialectic. He just never had time to do it, so that's, sort of leaves the job for us to continue that analysis. And I don't know, it's funny when people try and pretend like Marxism is a dogma or Marxism is some kind of religion. I've heard people say, why would you call yourself a Marxist? That's like calling yourself a Christian, or, saying you're an adherent to one person. It's like, no, it's just the name of the school of thought, which is constantly developing, constantly changing, constantly building on itself, and is contributed to by, many more people than just Karl Marx. What's the word Rockhill uses? He says it's like a living, breathing
spirit.
Method analysis. So
yeah. I mean, there's some people that prefer to just call it scientific socialism, and I think that's fair. It is what it is, but I agree with using Marxism as a label, although Marxism, Engelsism would perhaps be more correct, because we should never undermine the contributions that Engels makes and how he sets the stage for the best parts of Marx as well. Yeah, you mentioned the theme of crisis. It's so interesting. I don't think many people know what the etymology of the word crisis is. It depicts a separation of things that shouldn't be separated, a certain distance between parts that should be together. And that's the core of the contradiction in the commodity, and in commodity production, a separation between the buying and the selling, which is at the core of the crisis. And it's a crisis or a separation that then ends up reflecting itself in a variety of other ways. And he describes the general crisis of capital he says that in theories of surplus values, he says that it's a manifestation of all the crises or of all the contradictions of capitalism showing itself up at once. So it's I think in one of the more deep waters that you can get into in the study of Marxism, and we're very glad that we can have people like Alan Freeman and Radhika Desai, professional economists, that they're at home in those later volumes when he's talking about crisis and these phenomena that are, since they're the most concrete, they're the ones that require the most study to get to know, to comprehend it correctly. Yeah, there was another comment that you made about someone brought up the German ideology. One of the things that like the anti-Marxist-Leninist crowd is trying to do in Marxist scholarship is discredit the validity of the German ideology, because it was initially planned out to be a journal. So they had like Marx, Engels, and a few other young Hegelians had a plan to do a journal, and they had gotten someone who was going to fund it. And so they did the articles for like 2 issues, basically. And then the thing fell through, and Marx and Engels tried to publish it as a book. They rejected they rejected it, and so they, there's this phrase that they both repeat a few times throughout their life, which is that it served as a way for them to clear their ideas about this new worldview that they were developing. But portions of the big one, people usually read the smaller one, which is like part 1 on Feuerbach. It's actually like a pretty dense big text, and portions of the big ones are actually written by some of the young Hegelians that Marx and Engels worked with. I can't remember precisely who they were, but I still think that it's a very much an important text that I don't think of it as any less now that like these revelations have came out that it's not actually like a book that they intended to write.
I mean,
Um,
dude, there's so much valuable stuff that Marx didn't want to publish because he was
oh my God.
not insecure, but he was, like obsessive about the form of presentation and making sure everything he said was perfect, because being that Marxism is a science and that at the time, they couldn't work that cooperatively as academics. It was mostly just Marx and Engels trying to expound this science and do this scientific analysis. So he has to be insanely rigorous without much help. He's got to be insanely rigorous on his own, which means a lot of time intensive and energy intensive work on his part. So he was obsessive about, how we presented this information and making sure that it was scientifically accurate. So there's so much, valuable stuff that was never published, that's probably 95 to 100% accurate, that, especially beginners can learn from. And I remember you telling me years ago when we were still in undergrad to read German ideology, because you had been going through it. And, I always regretted not starting with that. Instead, I dove right into Capital, which was fine. But then, in between my first and second readings of Capital and sort of, reading a lot of these like basic or, sort of classic Leninist texts or stuff written by Stalin or whatever. After reading a bunch of that, I picked up the German ideology and I was like, wow, this is so clear cut. This helps me understand the philosophical portion of this so much. It helps me understand, what the Hegelian dialectic is, what Marx and Engels actually use it for. And, it makes it pretty clear. So, just because it's not something that Marx intended to publish or it wasn't in the finished form of presentation doesn't mean it can't be useful,
Right.
and especially for people, once you get sort of more well-versed in dialectical materialism and Marxism, you don't have to take everything Marx and Engels say as, dogmatically true or fact, like it's the Bible. You can criticize or question or, wonder maybe this has changed now today. Especially when you're reading their less finished works.
And they did that. Engels
Mm.
was the one who found it when he was asked. He was asked to do a reply to a book that had been done on Ludwig Feuerbach, and the editors of the main newspaper of the German Social Democratic Party, they asked Engels to do a reply, where he would lay out his and Marx's views on Hegel and Feuerbach. And so he went to go look for those large octave volumes, as he called it, which were the German ideology, and he read it, and he thought it was good, but he thought that it was unfinished in a couple of ways. One of which is the fact that the knowledge itself was unfinished. They didn't have as concrete an understanding of capitalism as they would develop later on. And we know Marx's really intense studies of capitalism don't take place until the 50s, the mid 1850s, late 1850s, and you start to get these manuscripts like the Grundrisse, which are 1857 to 1859. The German ideology is written in 1845 to 6, and so it's well before they had a really, really good refined understanding of capitalist political economy. So he decided not to publish it, but when he went looking for that, that's where he found the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, and he ended up publishing that as an appendix to his pamphlet that he wrote from scratch, Ludwig Feuerbach and the Outcome of Classical German Philosophy, which is another absolutely classic text of Marxism, dealing directly with the question of the relationship of Marxism to Hegel, of Marxism to Feuerbach, and for me, since my field is philosophy, it's one of my favorite of the works that Marx and Engels do. And now we're gonna perhaps have it in print at some point this year with the a new introduction from Thomas Reagan, since he's working on a series dealing with that a very awesome pamphlet. So
For sure. Looking forward to that. Um, this person says, I did like Marx's other works, Wage, Labor, and Capital, Value, Price, and Profit, Got the Program, The Jewish Question, all still useful. Absolutely. And it's interesting once you start to learn, the sort of history of Marx's life and, the context in which he wrote these, like Wage, Labor, and Capital, Value, Price, and Profit just seems like capital condensed,
yeah,
a beginner's guide to capital or whatever. And that's, basically what it was. Marx was basically commissioned to write a pamphlet summarizing his studies of economics. So this Capital series that he took all this time writing and thinking about the mode of presentation, and it ends up being 3 volumes, 2 of them unfinished. Just this massive book. Someone's like, yeah, can you put this into a pamphlet? I'll give you some money. The workers, need it in this condensed form. So Marx did that. And then a lot of the stuff like Marx published and, had to spend his time on were like in response to his contemporaries or in response to his critics. He was constantly having to engage with Proudhonists and, classical economists and people coming after him, people smearing him the same way that we would have to do in modern day. And he had to deal with the relevant political questions of his time, like, the Jewish question. That was, a very relevant political work. You have workers falling into or being tricked into anti-Semitism as opposed to anti-capitalism. So you kind of got to expound that question specifically. So, all of these things were written in context. And the more you learn, or I feel like it's interesting to know the context you were written in, and it helps you get a more humanizing understanding of Marx and Engels. Like, they weren't gods, they had some insane levels of brain power. But, they were humans living in specific material conditions. They were products of those material conditions. And, the works that they produced were also, products of the conditions they were living in. Similar to an institute today, like Midwestern Marx, we always say, if capitalism wasn't decaying in the imperial core, there's no way 2 college athletes from the Midwest would have started a Marxist institute for, political education of the workers. But here we are. So yeah, it's interesting to think about the conditions in which any philosopher wrote, what they wrote.
yeah. The context is so important and it's so helpful. In my intro to philosophy class, I assign a whole lot of thinkers. I divide the class into 4 epochs, and I know that it's somewhat difficult for people to keep up with who said what because it's a lot of thinkers. And what I have been told by the students consistently that helps the most is the context. I get to class in the first 15 minutes, I'm talking about the person, and I'm contextualizing the text that it was that they read, and that allows them to attach the ideas to a story, which allows them to memorize it a whole lot easier. And that it's also important to note that a lot of these like wage, labor, and capital, it was one of those early speeches that Marx gave. He was still refining his understanding. I want to say it was 1849 when he gave the speech, because he's not the original version. He uses labor and not labor power, which is a development that you're reading the Grundrisse. He makes it in that 57 to 59 range of his studies, and the version that we get is usually the one that's fixed by Engels. And in the introduction, he mentions, I fixed some of the mistakes, one of which is his usage of labor, not labor power. But he was heading down the right track. It's not like he was completely wrong in his early stuff. He was just, I like to think of it as a process of refinement. It's a concretization in his knowledge of the capitalist totality. And there's been these debates for the last century. Maybe they haven't been around too much over the last 3-4 decades, but about how you divide Marx's life. Um, there was this trend coming out of certain parts of the communist movement in Italy and coming out of Althusser that tried to divide, a young Marx and a later Marx, and then other trends that tried to go and make more divisions. And, it's wrong to both say that the early Marx the younger Marx is as good as the older Marx. But it's also wrong to say that he's completely different, that there's a break, and I think both mistakes, both extremes just end up showing the lack of dialectical thinking and being able to think of Marx's writing and life as itself a process of concretizing that both retains some of the same while also developing new things and refining and making those things that he had before even better. It's a process of him constantly sublating himself. And when you look at it from that standpoint, you're able to appreciate both the later works and the earlier works in a different form, because you're able to see how the germs of the later works are in the earlier works. And that's I
Yeah.
saw we have a super chat. So I don't know if
Yeah,
you
I'll
want to
bring
address
that up. I got one more thing to say about what you just said, though, and then
that.
I'll bring up the super chat. But the Gundrissa kind of, and I don't know if Althusser had access to the Gundrissa. It was published later, but it kind of allows you to see Marx's process of development and how he's figuring this stuff out in his head. When he actually comes to the distinction between labor and labor power. Labor in its commodified form and giving that its own name. And it has a special use value. And it kind of allowed me to nerd out with like political economy, because I studied economics in college as much as I could, to try and add to my understanding of Marxism or bourgeois economics. And in the Gundrissa, Marx takes the economic categories of classical political economy, of bourgeois political economy, and he criticizes them. So he says, what are the categories, the abstract categories that they're using to explain the material economy and how it works? And then he criticizes each one of them, says, here's where they're sufficient and here's where they're not. And with time, as he goes through these different categories, adds his own category, like labor power, the commodified form of labor. So, I mean, the Gundrissa can be boring, but if you're like kind of a nerd for this stuff, it is fun to read because you see Marx working through these things in his own head. I don't know where I was going with that, but you see how he quantitatively adds, different categories to the economic science of Marxism as he goes along.
And he's still trying to figure out like how he's going to present all this shit. Right. And that's something that you read the Nicolaus forward. I read the forward like maybe 2 years after I read the text, because I was skipping. I usually skip the forwards, but I stopped doing that when I started teaching the Intro to Philosophy class because I noticed how helpful they are. So I went back and read the Nicolaus forward. And one of the good distinctions that he makes is between the method of investigation and the method of presentation. And what you get in the Grundrisse is that method of investigation, which is in the process of trying to figure out what would be the best dialectical method of presentation for the information. So one of the things you find is that the assortment of the unfolding of the categories are themselves rearranged in capital, as opposed to the Grundrisse. Althusser, you mentioned Althusser. He hadn't read the Grundrisse. He admitted that after he had done, his more polemical takes on Marx's life and work. And I think if he had, he would have noticed how wrong he was about saying that some of these earlier themes like alienation and the more Feuerbachian Marx, how they didn't really go away, because alienation is still one of the central questions in the Grundrisse. That's why a little while ago we were asked, what were our favorite texts, and I said the Grundrisse because it's got, as refined an embryo as you can get for his political economy works that come after, and it's also got explicitly tarried with philosophical themes from the young Marx. So it's like a nice synthesis of young and old Marx, a good midpoint,
True.
both in terms of like the time that he writes life, but also in terms of his work. So had Althusser read the Grundrisse fully, because I think that at that time it was only the introduction which was circulating. But had he read it fully, I think he maybe wouldn't have been so bold in his breaking apart of Marx's life.
I agree. I do that, and that's why I brought it up. That I didn't know if he had access to that book, because I feel like it kind of would have thrown a wrench in his theory of, there being two separate Marxes. But yeah, this super chat. Thank you, Chris, for the $5 super chat. Little known is that Dialectics of Nature remained unpublished until 1925. Engels gave it to Bernstein, who asked Einstein if he thought it was worthy. That's really interesting. I have not read Dialectics of Nature. I want to, because I've been getting into the Lysenko stuff a little bit and evolutionary biology and whatnot. But I mean, that's a really cool anecdote that they gave it to Einstein. And for those who don't know, I guess Einstein was a socialist. He has this amazing piece that was published in Monthly Review, I believe, called "Why Socialism?" And you see that his mind works scientifically. He thinks like a scientist, which means he has a good grasp on, even though he's not a political economist or anything like that, or a social scientist. He has a really good grasp on the scientific method, and therefore he has a good grasp on scientific socialism. So in that text, Why Socialism, he really lays out, a basic and, solid argument for why socialism is the way forward, and, how most of the societal ills that we suffer come from capitalism. But I didn't know that he had read Dialectics of Nature. That kind of makes sense, though.
Thank you, Chris, for the super chat. And if anyone wants to know more about that history, I would definitely recommend this book, Frederick Engels and the Dialectics of Nature by Kaan Kangal. I believe he's Turkish, but he's teaching in China. I did a review for it, and I'll drop that in the chat when I'm done making this point. But yeah, it's a text that is unfinished. It was supposed to be Engels' magnus opus, so the main book that he had been working on, and that he was constantly getting interrupted in the middle of his work, like Anti-Düring, which is the closest thing you have to like a textbook in Marxism. It interrupted him, and it took him away from his studies that he was conducting for Dialectics of Nature. And there's this awesome letter that he sends Marx, because Marx, Düring is getting some traction in the German Social Democratic Workers' Party, and he says like, okay, we've been ignoring it long enough. We have to take this guy down. And so Engels replies, you get to sit warmly studying the Russian Obshchina, so the Russian commune, and do all this nice scholarship that you want to do. But I, at your will, I have to, drink a glass of warm wine and get to taking down this buffoon of Düring. So it was, that's another one where people try to separate Marx and Engels, not just with Anti-Düring, but with Dialectics of Nature. And it's a big mistake because Marx completely ignored it. And they had a very kind of clear-cut division of labor. Marx was very clearly in political economy. He was also in mathematics, which was primarily a hobby for him, but his mathematical notebooks, from what I've heard from mathematicians, are quite impressive. And he was in anthropology, and there was some overlap between the two in anthropology. But Engels was clearly the one that was spearheading the effort in the sciences. And when Darwin's The Origins of Species comes out, Engels is one of the first people to read it, and he had actually made statements to Marx in a letter weeks before The Origins of Species is published that are considered basically some of the essential points made in The Origins of Species. So Engels was at the cutting edge in his studies of the sciences, and dialectics of nature, although unfinished and although containing flaws and areas where comments are made in fields of sciences that have since been overcome, not the field, but the statements, the theories, it's still a wonderful text for how we should approach the philosophy of science. And I think it's extremely important. When they sent that to Einstein, one of the things that Einstein said was that it was a very interesting text, and it's got great historical value, in part because the debates that Engels is commenting on, it wasn't like a idiotic comments that he was making. They were very good comments, and in certain areas cutting edge. But he said that it should be published for its historical value and not its scientific value, because the sciences had advanced, and had Engels been alive, he would have probably said something similar, or adjusted certain areas of his comments. But it's a it's a it's another text that led to a great controversy between Marxism, Leninism, and Western Marxism, which is on the not just on the question of Engels' relationship to Marx, but on the question of dialectics. Is dialectics something that you're going to just constrain within human society, or is it something that you're going to see as working itself out both in nature and in human society, and working itself beyond that in human society because it's already ingrained as a process that is part of the natural order, that's it's got a certain ontological weight that goes beyond just human formations. So it's a wonderful text. It's unfinished, but it's one I'd recommend people to read. He had published actually before 1925, before the whole thing was published. He had published the essay, which is a wonderful essay, which is titled "The Role Labor Played in the Transition from Ape to Man," which that one is on the cutting edge of the theory of human evolution. Stephen Jay Gould actually said that that had we listened to Engels, the sciences would have been 100 years ahead, because Engels' point in that essay was that it was labor which developed the mind. It wasn't the mind that developed the other stuff. It was labor which developed the hand, which developed the mind, and it developed language. So it's a very materialist understanding of human development, whereas they were thinking about it's the mind, the size of the brain, that led to everything else. It was the other way around. And yeah, that I could talk about this for days. I wrote a review of the book, but it's I definitely recommend people to read both the Dialectics of Nature and this book that contextualizes it historically.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I mean, it's like I'm just scratching the surface with what I've studied about evolutionary biology, and I mostly jumped into it just because, Lysenko gets caught up with all the Holodomor propaganda, and he's a controversial figure to bring up in the West, which means some people just love bringing him up on Twitter all the time. But ultimately, you see that a lot of the Soviet scientists, even without nearly the amount of research that we have today, they were, by sticking to the dialectical materialist method, they predicted a lot of things that are now being proven by modern science. And sometimes there were mistakes made where they were overly abstract. They were sort of imposing their conception of dialectical materialism on reality rather than going to the concrete first and then the abstract. But still, there was this idea that the human genome continually develops actively. So, you can hereditarily pass on the traits that you develop over the course of your life. So if you're in an environment where, say, there's a lot of malaria, there's a chance that the community, or you and your community, might develop a resistance to malaria, actively, because of the way that our internal body mediates the external world. And then you can pass those those traits on hereditarily. You can pass those on to the next generation, and this is all being, found. It's called epigenetics, is this sort of new field. There's all sorts of new research into this, but this is what the Soviet scientists were saying in like the 1930s. So it's interesting to see that Engels was so ahead of his time as well, when it comes to the hard sciences. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I wanted to answer Happy 65's question. Happy has been working through the manuscripts. So, we just got a super chat too. We'll get to that ASAP. Thank you, Molly. But he says, I'm still having trouble understanding what Marx means by universal or universality, especially in the chapter about estranged labor. What I would have to see it in context, but what I would imagine, and the way Marx usually uses universal or universality, is like something that exists in all modes of production. So like, labor is universal. It's existed in every single mode of production. Now, the form that labor exists in, the relations of production, the way labor is organized, the division of labor is different in every mode of production, constantly changing and developing. And bourgeois economists, or people, living in capitalism, often see the elements that are unique to capitalism as being universal, right? They'll talk about tools in the feudal era or in the era of slaves as being capital, when in fact, those tools back then didn't function as capital. Capital only functions as capital under capitalism. So there's a tendency among bourgeois economists to universalize concepts that are specific to capitalism. And there are things that are universal among all human societies, right? But their form is always changing. So that's my understanding, but you go ahead, Carlos.
Well, I'd say one that I don't want to say that the manuscripts of 1844 are irrelevant, but I do want to say, because I enjoy them a lot and I assign them for my class. But be wary of the fact that it's a 26-year-old Marx who decides that he's not going to publish them, even at a moment where he wasn't anywhere near as developed in political economy as he would then be in 10 years when he does his very profound studies in London during the mid to late 50s and early 60s. So I would say that, be wary of the manuscripts of 44 in terms of thinking about it as a cornerstone to what Marxism is, because I want to say that what we call Marxism really ends up developing with the German ideology, and they're very explicit about that in their reflection on their work. It's the German ideology when there's a breakthrough. Now, I don't want to hold this Althusserian idea of an epistemological break, but it is true that the Marx in 1844 is really, it's basically applying the analysis that Feuerbach had of religious alienation to political economy. And although certain germs from that are concretized later on in his life, I think the theme of alienation is always present, and there's always a very humanistic tinge to his analysis of capitalist political economy. He's always concerned with how objectification turns into alienation under the conditions of capitalist relations of production. I would say that the language that he uses, he called it himself philosophical, not philosophical mumbo jumbo, but a similar expression. He called it. He was critical of the language that he used. So I want to say that the way he's using universal there is perhaps not as concrete as he would use universal elsewhere. But the question of the universal in Marxism, as in Hegel, is a question that I think it's absolutely fundamental to understand the essence of the worldview and of dialectics, which is, what is the universal? In traditional philosophy, the universal is considered that which is shared in the same way across all space and time. So when you say that the universal essence of man is X, Y, or Z, you're saying that when human beings are born, regardless of what time they're born in or what place they're born in, they're going to have these characteristics. That's what universal was thought of in the history of philosophy, and in many philosophy circles, it's still considered in that way. As opposed to that, what Hegel and Marxism would call abstract universal, that's disconnected from history, it's disconnected from context. What the Marxists and Hegelians postulate is a concrete universal. The idea that it's not the case that the universal is here and the particular is here, that the particular is a necessary component of the universal. The universal can only exist as universal insofar as it is concretized through the particular. And so the universal plays the role of the content, and the particular plays the role of the form, and both components need to be there for both to exist. So the perfect example, as you mentioned, Eddie, is labor, which is an example that Ilyenkov uses. Labor is the universal, but labor in general does not really exist. It always exists in a particular form, concretized and determined by the socioeconomic political circumstances of a certain period in history or of a certain historical place. So the universal, the main point that you have to take away is that it is treated dialectically. The universal depends on the particular in order to manifest itself. And, questions about labor in general or socialism in general, they don't really make sense from the point of view of Marxism, because those things which we consider universal can only be understood through their concretization in the particular. So socialism, it always takes place through a particular form. And in China, you have socialism with Chinese characteristics. In Venezuela, you have Bolivarian socialism. In Cuba, you have a socialism that incorporates the traditions of Martí and the anti-colonial struggles. In Bolivia, you have a socialism that incorporates the indigenous, communalist, primary communist traditions. In the U.S., the point that we make is you're going to have a socialism that embraces some of the more progressive traditions of the U.S.'s history, and this is just because of the form that socialism takes. Socialism is the universal, the content, and in order for it to exist, it does so through a specific form, through a particular, and that's always embedded in a specific time and place.
And that's why it doesn't make any sense when people say Marx never discussed human nature, which is a common propaganda talking point, because one, he did talk about human nature, and two, he didn't see human nature as universal. He saw it as particular to, each time period and each mode of production. So, human psychology and humans' relations with each other and the way humans are motivated and what they're interested in changes with the passage of time and with the changing of material conditions. So if you ever hear somebody say Marx never considered human nature, you can tell them that human nature is not universal, silly.
Well, not universal in the sense in which they would think about universal.
Right.
So he would hold that, it's labor is universal for human beings, right? And Engels even says in that essay on the role that labor played in the transition from ape to man, he says that labor made man himself. So the human being is a product of labor. So if you're going to look at something as a universal human essence or species essence, if you want to use the Feuerbachian language of the early Marx, if you're going to talk about human nature, the most you can say is that it's defined by humans' relationality with one another. They're very much social animals. That was already in Aristotle. That have as their most unique characteristic in comparison to other animals the ability to work, and to work in ways that change according to different historical periods. So again, the question of a human essence is one that's defined by a specific time and place, but the universal, right, the common aspect would be labor. Because even thinking is an emergent property of the development of societies that are shaped by trying to produce the things that are necessary for people to survive. So philosophers have always said, what makes a human is the ability to ask the question about what makes a human, right? They always go to consciousness, right? Feuerbach would go and he would say consciousness in a specific form. And they always refer to thinking in some form. And for Marx and Engels, thinking is an emergent property of the development of these sorts of beings that are themselves an emergent property out of nature, and which through labor and through their interactions are able to develop the ability to think in ways that go beyond what we can experience in any animal. So there is a human nature, and it does not exist in an ahistorical fashion and abstractly. It always exists in a specific context. So it's a both and.
Yeah, actually, Ingalls says in the transition from, or he talks about the transition from ape to man. He's like, a human becomes a human instead of a beast when labor becomes cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
At that point when they stop, just roaming around as individuals, like individual monkeys or whatever, and they start working together, that's when you have the transition out of, being an animal.
And that's proven. That's proven by science today. Some of the most cutting edge studies are in Japan, and they figured out that, what made the way that humans evolved was that it was the weakest monkeys that were forced down. The monkeys were able to escape the most dangerous predators that were in the land, and the human beings were the monkeys that were the weakest ones and went down. And in order, the way that they were able to survive was because of cooperation. They were able to work with one another to ensure their own subsistence, again, labor, and out of those relationships develop the abilities to think in a social fashion and to plan. And it's because of those developments that they were able to, even though they don't have the strength of a lion or a tiger, even though they don't have like wings, or they don't have physical characteristics that makes them that makes them similar to other more traditional predators. They were able to survive, and now we know, get to the top of the food chain because of that sociality and the emergent property of thinking and planning that they were able to develop out of it.
For sure. And that's something that I try to touch on in the Origins reading guide, which part 3 is coming soon. I do my best to update, not totally because I'm not an anthropologist, but sort of update Ingalls' analysis with modern science. Say, here's where he's been proven right, and compare it to the works of like the anarchist anthropologist David Graeber. And it's pretty crazy how ahead of his time Ingalls was in the field of anthropology, which is something we talked about earlier with dialectics of nature. Just he was way ahead of all the other scientists. I mean, Lewis Henry Morgan did a lot of great foundational work that Marx and Engels needed to write Origins, but it was still way ahead of their time. Thank you, Molly McGuire, for the $10 super chat. Y'all are amazing. Here's a little something for the cause. Thank you very much. We promise we'll put it to good use. Appreciate the support. Jamie, consistent viewer, one of our favorites, says, "This is my favorite class." I'm glad. It doesn't feel like class when you're choosing to be there. That's what Carlos and I have decided. It's only class when you have to force yourself to go. But yeah, we're happy to have you. I'm glad you're learning stuff. And I've been a little bit discouraged lately. Like when we had the old TikTok account with almost 400,000 followers, like I could post about anything and it would get at least 10,000 views. Like I could post about the most specific, obscure part of Capital Volume 1, and it would get at least 10,000 views eventually. And lately it seems like our short, more clickbaity videos are blowing up, and the more theoretical ones aren't quite as much, which there may be, a reason for that. Maybe the algorithm or whatever. But what I really love about the streams is that it allows us to interact with y'all directly. And like the people in the chat are always so engaged. Like y'all are always so engaged with what we're saying. You're always offering questions and comments that are extremely relevant. People are telling us their own reading that they're doing and asking us questions about specific texts. Like it's really great that we've started building this community of learners, and that we can all help each other develop theoretically. And a lot of people probably got filtered into our live streams from TikTok, but I feel like we can get a lot deeper with these. So yeah, appreciate the $20 ultimately though.
Thank you.
Um,
I just wanted to say real
yeah, you
quick,
go.
someone from Alienated Press mentioned the hand. We had mentioned it when we talked about dialectics of nature earlier, which is that the hand is like the point of departure for the whole development of everything else. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, which is so unexpected if you have an idealist worldview. It's like you're thinking about the brain and
Yeah.
thinking how thinking develops everything else, and that's why, as Stephen Jay Gould said, had we listened to Engels, we would have been 100 years ahead in our field. So thank you for the comment.
Absolutely. Alienated Press has dropped a handful in insightful chats I've noticed. I wanted to take a stab at this. Been talking a lot of philosophy. I guess we'll hit some economics. Got another super chat too. We'll get to that in a sec. But it says, what this is relevant now because we've got a lot of inflation going on, probably about to hit another crisis or going through another crisis right now. But it says, would you be able to give the Marxist explanation for why economists are saying we need more unemployment to bring inflation down? I mean, this is the kind of stuff you'll learn in bourgeois economics if you study it in college. It's really what neoclassical economics is like price astrology. You're just looking at prices and then you're trying to manipulate prices in order to maximize profit. That's essentially what it is. So you have these contradictory concepts within bourgeois political economy, like we just need to increase unemployment to bring inflation down. It's like, well, we got to pick one or the other. So we either have to have people unemployed, unable to produce their means of subsistence, or the means of subsistence have to be priced through the roof, and you see these inherent contradictions in the capitalist mode of production show themselves in the abstract field of bourgeois economy. But essentially, there's an inverse relation in capitalism between inflation and employment. And unemployment, because if you have less workers, they're going to have less reserve funds or less wages stored up. Trying to use more Marxist terms here rather than bourgeois political economy terms, but they overlap. So when you have high unemployment, workers don't have as much money to buy on goods, means of subsistence, so it drives the demand for those goods down, which then drives the price for those goods down, as capitalists are trying to get rid of the goods that they have so they can reproduce their capital. So ultimately, high unemployment means workers have less reserve funds to pay for goods. So demand goes down, and then the prices of goods come down. So inflation comes down, which is again, the most capitalist solution you could come up with. Let's throw people into unemployment to get rid of inflation. It's an inherent contradiction in capitalism, the fact that there's an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Carlos, to explain that.
No, you hit the nail on the head. And remember that when labor power is a commodity, that includes labor power as well. The point that I wanted to make is it's a very contradictory and absurd system, because it requires, as these statements that political economists, bourgeois political economists are saying, it requires what Marx would call a relative surplus population. What essentially that means is this unique dialectics of superfluity, where superfluous people are indispensable for the system. The system needs people that are essentially expendable. and that's what the unemployed, as a segment of that relative surplus population, that's part of what it represents. It includes other sorts of social positions besides the unemployed, but it's one of the clearest cases where you could see how it is that the relations of production present the fodder for the development of the productive forces, right? In the U.S., we have an infrastructure that's dated that's rated a D, and or a D minus, I believe. And you know, at the time that we're in, you would think that you would try to give everyone a job in, building up the American infrastructure so that, it's we don't look like clowns when compared to China. Like, just look at China's trains. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's beautiful. It's so much more efficient, so much cheaper, so much so much more time efficient. Like, even when compared to flying in planes. You have to get to the airport like 3 hours before. It takes long as hell for the plane to even take off. All those time wasting activities that go into like a 3 hour flight, they're not included in China's, the bullet trains that go around the same speed, if not a little quicker than planes, and that you basically just show up and you're good to go. So, you know, we're at a time when there could be so much more development of the forces of production, so much more social wealth can be created, and it's not. And not only is it not being created, people are thinking about creating conditions so that there's more poverty, so that there's more people in unemployment. And it's, if that doesn't show the absurdity of the existing order that we're in, I don't know what does.
Absolutely. And you got me going down a rabbit hole in my own brain now, thinking about the labor market. Because if you look at the labor market for capitalists, when there's increased unemployment, the demand for workers is going to go up and the supply is going to go down, which is also going to increase prices, which is going to increase the amount of money that capitalists need to spend on their variable capital, which is going to then increase the prices of commodities. So, even this capitalist solution, or this idea that there's an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment, like, capitalism's so contradictory, and the interests of the working class and the capitalist class are completely inverted, diametrically opposed. So, these capitalist solutions, or bourgeois political economy, this way of analyzing capitalism, doesn't even necessarily work. You could have an action like increasing unemployment that decreases inflation in one way, but then on the other end, it's going to increase prices, which may not happen until later on, with the passage of time. So, yeah, bourgeois political economy is a pseudoscience, which is
Richard
part of why
Wolff,
it takes Marx so long to dissect it. But
yeah, and Richard Wolff has we have our critiques of him, but he's got a very good reply to this question, which is, who raises the prices? Who controls where the prices are at? Why do they raise them? For profit, to maximize profit, to ensure profit. Profits don't go down, and that's
surplus value more specifically. But
that's it. Yeah, that's very easy to explain to people. When they go to the grocery store, prices are not set by this, godly force that says, if everything goes this way, then these other things should go this way. It's capitalists making choices of where they have to put things in order to sustain their profit margins.
Who's the grocery store? It's like Sam's Club or Costco. They've sold dollar hot dogs for like 40 years, and the CEO or whoever the owner has prevented them from changing that. And now it just recently got to the point where they're like losing money on it. Like, inflation has reached the point where they no longer have positive margins, but it's fine because, people will go to Costco and buy a hot dog with other stuff, so they make the money elsewhere. They make their surplus elsewhere. But it's like, so you're telling me that, the cost of producing this good hasn't even gone up that much, and if capitalists choose, they could keep their price at a certain level. And yes, I mean, it's a choice, and it's also spurred on by competition, right? It's not necessarily spurred on by a need to increase the price of goods because producing them is becoming more expensive. It's based on competition and controlling the largest share of the market possible and selling your goods for the maximum price you possibly can. That's going to bring in the most surplus value, so like, the public good or the use value of that commodity isn't brought into the equation at all. It's all intended to maximize surplus value and win the market competition.
Right. it's a dialectic of monopoly, of competition within the bounds of state monopoly capitalism. And
Absolutely.
it's extremely efficient at just doing whatever it wants in order to maximize profits. And I think
I have,
Arizona, is Arizona the other one?
sorry, what?
Arizona, that I think they've had the drinks for like 89 cents.
Yeah.
Since,
Yeah. They're the other ones. I was trying to think of them. Yeah.
yeah.
I want to get to this super chat, but I thought of something that's so well related. I was doing research today for class for school, an assignment about nonprofit hospitals, and the vast majority of nonprofit, well, 7 of the 10 most profitable hospitals in America are nonprofit. The nonprofits are the most profitable. So that might not make sense, but the and 3 of those nonprofits, 3 of the most profitable ones, are attached to ACA or HCA Healthcare, which is the largest, most profitable healthcare conglomerate or hospital system in the country, as far as conglomerates who own healthcare providers specifically. And the rest of them, the rest of the 7 most profitable, are attached to other hospital systems. So you have these nonprofits that are tax exempt, but they're controlled by the same shareholders who own shares, who own stocks in these hospital systems.
Mm,
So essentially, what the nonprofits become are tools to, one, control prices, and 2, control market share. Because these capitalists can make money from their pharmaceutical companies, their for-profit hospitals, their ambulance companies, whatever else is tied into this for-profit hospital system. And then they can invest surplus value from that in the nonprofit, which is going to be tax exempt. And in fact, they're going to get it's going to be tax deductible. They're
mm,
going to save money. They're going to be like, oh, look at me doing all this charitable donations and philanthropy. And then they'll use the nonprofits as a tool, like I said, to control prices, control markets, and really move closer to having a full monopoly on the market. So they're masters at manipulating market forces. And as you said, there's 100% a dialectic between the competition of the market and the move towards more monopolization of the market, because the competition is what drives this. This drives this, this interest in setting prices and controlling as much of the market as possible. But as it continues, and as companies outcompete others and buy up others, you get concentration, consolidation, and monopoly.
mhm.
So the competition leads to its opposite. I
Right.
don't know if you have anything else to say about that, but then we should probably hit this super chat.
No, that I think you hit all the points on the head. Yeah.
Good. What do you think about car dependency in America? We got cucked, in my opinion. All efficient countries use trains. Well, I think this might be a good transition, actually, into one of the videos that Carlos brought for today, a train comparison of the U.S. and China. I know this has been a big debate, because like cars are an American cultural staple.
Mm,
It's something that I think comes from the mode of production. It stems from the mass production of automobiles that we had um, around the era of Henry Ford and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I'm not in favor of like an anti-car campaign, like the idea we need to take everyone's car away right now. But what I am in favor of is more public transportation, more
yeah.
public transportation, more public transportation, more public transportation, free public transportation, invest the surplus of society, the surplus in the workers, in public transportation, because it's going to help every one of the workers. It's going to save us money. It's going to improve our quality of life. It's going to help us combat climate change. So I'm all on board with the public transport and the trains.
And with time, I think a lot of people will end up making the switch towards primarily using public transportation. You know how, as someone who has to drive all the time, who I can't just be on the passenger seat hanging out, it's so annoying driving, having to pay attention to the road, to be constantly under like threat of, if I daze off a little bit, I might get into a potentially deadly car accident. When you hop on a train, you're not going to crash, and you can like bring a book, you can study, you can use that time productively.
Good
And
point.
how much time do people spend commuting to and from work, where like if they had trains, they could be doing more enjoyable things in those trains. um, Now I look at the trains in New York, and I don't know if what goes down is is a process of cultivating virtue. It's usually a bunch of crazy shit going on.
That's capitalist trains
Capitalist trains, right, right.
where they're
And
hitting
Chinese
people
trains,
for
they breathe.
jumping the turnstiles and shit.
Yeah. But yeah, I think with time, yeah, people are going to realize how more efficient it ends up being for their time. And if not, then they might continue having their cars. Cars are nice as hell, man. I grew up in the same culture as everyone else, and I think a good-looking American muscle car is it's about as beautiful a thing as you can find.
Nice
Um,
red Mustang.
right, right. Which I'll have to let go of now that I need a family car. But unfortunately, I'm dreading the day. But yeah, it's I don't think going with anti-car is a good slogan for socialists to take up. But more public transit, I think, is and more efficient public transit. Like a lot of the public transit that we have, just like the infrastructure, is very, very shitty, and we're going to see that now in the video that will show you comparing U.S. trains to China.
For sure. I'll pull that video up right here. Um, Living in America. This is truly shocking.
This
This,
guy is
yeah,
awesome. I love his channel. As a sort of I watch a bunch of these people that just live in China and do vlogs, and it's extremely enjoyable. But he lives in a 5-tier city. So it's like it's not Beijing or Shanghai. It's like 5 levels below, and there's 8 levels for their cities. Um, and he's got other videos where he shows the city, and a 5-tier city in China is nicer, cleaner, more developed, more efficient than the nicest cities in the United States. So what that means is that some of the poorest cities in China are a hell of a lot better than the richest cities in the United States. And part of what you see in his videos is he's walking around, he's looking, he sees all these nice buildings and these nice parks with a lot of greenery. And what you never find is something you find if you're in any major city, whether that be Chicago or New York or Miami. Homeless people. You find homeless people all over the fucking place, whether you're driving and they're asking for money, or next to buildings, or literally find them all over the place in the United States. I think there's currently 600,000 homeless people, and that's a number that's probably gone up since that statistic, which is a couple years old. You don't find that in China. So the wealth that they have amassed, it has actually gone towards creating common prosperity. It's lifted everyone up, as opposed to the wealth in the U.S. It's very visibly polarizing. You could see those contradictions at play when you go to South Beach, and you see these great buildings, but you see homeless people. You see people that are addicted to drugs, that are on the street struggling. You don't see that in China. You see not only nicer wealth, but you also don't see the polarizing element that you see in the U.S.
yeah, I've gotten a chance to travel over the U.S. quite a bit for wrestling, which I'm really grateful for. But I was coaching a national team last year, and we went to Tulsa, and like the homelessness issue has just gotten so bad. And like right when you drive into town, there's an advertisement for a company that will give you loans to pay your bail if you go to jail. So, you can take out a loan to get out of jail, and then you got to pay that loan back, probably with some insane interest rates. So you have these giant cities with all this wealth, accumulated in them, and then just the most predatory practices and that have put people on the streets everywhere you look. And, I remember thinking, I wish I could just show these kids who are with me, like China. I wish I could just show them, a city without homeless people, or, a city without homeless people can exist. This doesn't have to be the norm. But obviously that's what why corporate media doesn't actually talk about China's common prosperity or poverty alleviation, then we
Deng
might
won.
see that socialism works. But
Deng was right. He said, how are you going to continue speaking about the superiority of socialism if we continue to be poor? You know, we will concretely show people the superiority of socialism when they can do what they can do now, which is go to China and fall in love with it. And all of these people, they come from the West. You know, all these vloggers, there's some that are American, there's some that are British. They love China. They absolutely love it. And if they've been there for a few years, they've seen it grow, which is something that we don't see in the U.S. a lot. We don't see development, especially in a lot of the places in the Midwest that we're around. That it's just crumbling. What you find, things crumbling, falling apart, buildings being abandoned by the day, and the opposite is true of China. So it is true that, as Deng once predicted, we will show the superiority of socialism when people can come and see with their own eyes how it's better. And they'll be able to do that if they visit China today.
yes, the education system in the Midwest is just collapsing too, especially in the cities. So without further ado, let's check out this video.
Trains versus America's trains. What you're about to watch is truly shocking. Welcome back to another video. If you're new to the channel, then my name is...
Oh, come on. We're already experiencing technical difficulties.
That's the CIA.
aka Mr. 有意思. Now, I am not an American, and I'm also not Chinese. So once again, I'm a completely unbiased neutral party in this case. Now, I was going to do a video comparing China's high-speed rail network versus America's high-speed rail network, but unfortunately, America doesn't have one. So I'm going to be fair to America. I'm going to give them the best chance. So today we're going to be comparing metro systems, subway systems. Now we are here in Guiyang City in Guizhou province. It is one of the poorest provinces in all of China. So we're going to be comparing Guiyang City metro system to New York subway system. Now, obviously everyone knows New York, and it is ranked #1 out of all the American cities. It has the highest GDP in all of the United States. Actually, this is an unfair comparison to China. So America, I'm giving you the best chance in this one. So let's begin. Here is the entrance to the metro here. We're at Guanshanhu Park Station. Let's head in now. You can see the cleaner there, just cleaning up outside. There's where you go in there. You got the old COVID check, track and trace system there. Here's where you buy your tickets. Some kind of mural to minorities there. Here's our baby Lincoln.
It's crazy because we've had a bunch of controversies in New York City lately where police have been like beating people for trying to jump over the turnstiles and get onto the public transportation for free. Because that, they nickel and dime you and way overcharge people on it, which is how public services work under capitalism. They're not really public. They're always intended to make money somehow. But then you look at, just the stark contrast in China. No homeless people laying around. I actually saw a video of someone in a subway, in a metro station in New York, like, it's disgusting, but there's like someone who was mentally unstable, like grabbed the mop that someone was using and started pooping in the bucket, like in front of everybody. Just these horrible deteriorating conditions that we take as normal in the U.S. It's like, oh, yep, just another day on the New York metro system. And the police aren't going to do anything about that. They're not going to help people who are struggling in the U.S. They're just going to beat you if you try and jump over the turnstiles and get something for free. Right. And this also reminds me, this guy is basically just a vlogger, he's clearly not like a Marxist-Leninist theorist or anything. But there was a video that I responded to on TikTok a while back about these vloggers in North Korea. And some Western corporate media outlet like MSNBC was like, these vloggers, no, it was Vox News. It was Vox. They're like, these vloggers want you to think North Korea is great, you know, and it's literally just people going around and filming everyday life in North Korea. You know,
BBC said he was a shill of Xi Jinping. They said that BBC said that he was funded by the Communist Party and Xi Jinping and all that shit. So he uses it as a sort of internal joke in his videos, and he calls them BSB, so like bullshit Britain.
That's hilarious. And it's like, it is bullshit. It's crazy. We're getting to the point where the US, like these countries, like you said, they have achieved common prosperity. Like if Americans were to see them, you know, they could compare them to our country and look at, you know, so many ways in which the DPRK and China are superior. So now the propaganda media can't even have vloggers, right? They can't even have people just walking around and filming their everyday lives. They have to throw a bunch of, you know, vitriol at it and say, this is propaganda, this is evil, you know, these are authoritarian vlogs, because they're afraid if Americans see what socialism's actually like, they'll want some socialism.
And remember, this is one of the poorest cities in China. 5-tier, which means that there's 4 tiers on top of that. He's shown some of the train stations in some of the higher tiers, and you would go to that just to hang out, not even to take the train, because there's like basically a museum with a bunch of famous painting. There's one that had like a zoo. There was pandas inside a train station. Can you imagine that? Going into a train station, you see a zoo, and then there's an art museum here, and just activities that people can go and enjoy while they're waiting 5-10 minutes to get on a train. So remember that, like, the comparison here, as he said, is not even a fair one. He's dealing with one of the poor Chinese cities, which is the one that he lives in, and comparing it to the richest city in America. But you will still see the difference.
Just buying the tickets now. 6 RMB for 1 ticket. 2 tickets, 12 RMB. Okay. Show your code, track and trace. Yeah. Scan your ticket on here. And also, they have facial recognition if you set up your account. But obviously, I haven't set up my account to use it. So you can use facial recognition. You don't even have to get your hand out of your pocket for your card. You can just walk in using your face. So we're going to be using this. So we'll just scan there, and we're inside. Just have to come into the baby changing room here, because every time we go out, no matter what, Lincoln will do a massive poop, and then I'll probably leak out of the nappy as well. Yeah. Nice toilet here. Please flush. Comfort everyone. You did a poo-poo, did you? You did a poo-poo. Oh, gee. Oh, gee. You can see everyone's wearing their masks, following the rules. There's no litter, there's no rubbish on the floor. It's not noisy.
That's an older, you might pause it. That's an older video. China just lifted their zero COVID policy. And the way that they're framing it is that, you know, they succeeded in not having what would have been if they had the same rates of death as the US. You know, they succeeded in avoiding the death of around 5 million Chinese people. And now that COVID has developed into something that their scientists are saying, you know, it's kind of just like a regular flu, they've opened up again. And there's no, like, the policies that he has there, the zero COVID policies, they're not in place anymore. This video is a little older, but if you want, would you be able to just speed it up a little bit? Because it's a longer video, and I don't want people to get bored. I know I love seeing these, but I think the comparison might be the more important thing we want to show people.
For sure. I want to point out that the zero COVID policy, I mean, like there were protests in China against the strict lockdown policy, and the US tried to make it seem like, it was a literal regime change effort. And they, of course, are going to try and turn it into that. But, the government responded. That's the difference between our governments is, the Chinese government like locked the bank accounts of these truckers who were protesting and, literally took their ability to buy the means of subsistence away, took their bank accounts away. The most authoritarian practice you could ever think of, versus China, they adjusted their policy based on the demands of the people. Very authoritarian.
There's some surveillance camera there. You see outside at one of the stations there. A woman with a little yaoer. A little kid doing a squat. It's clean. It's safe. There's no gangs. There's no thugs. Lincoln likes it. You hold the camera. You hold the camera, do you? You hold the camera. It's your first vlog. No, you hold the camera. You hold the camera. Don't drop it. Don't drop it. Don't drop it. Don't drop it. What are you doing? What kind of angle is that? What kind of weird angles are you doing, Lincoln? Oh. Okay, give it back to me. Give it back to me. Give it back to me. Drop it. Don't hold it tighter. Drop it. Drop it. You won't let go. Oh, okay. It's back to me. Back to me. Safe. You're in safe hands now. So that was a Chinese subway metro. Wait, let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the facial recognition again. Oh, there I am in all my glory. Oh, it said I've not set up my account. Okay, let's use the card. Oh, we have to insert it now because it's the end of our journey, and we are away. We are out.
I've heard people say that facial recognition software is authoritarian when it's used in China. Like, what do you literally open your iPhone with Face ID now? Like, why is it only authoritarian when it happens in China, but never when corporations do it? It's the same thing with the social credit score. China's got this social credit score, which doesn't even work how most Americans think it works. But then here we've got the credit, everyone's got a credit score where your financial decisions determine if you're able to like buy a house or not. So everybody's got this number floating over their head based on how well they're doing under capitalism, which determines their quality of life, which is what we project onto China and say that their social credit system is, which it's not. But we're unable to look in the mirror and see that, it's just projection, all these things that we're saying about socialist countries. And especially when it comes to their, quote unquote, authoritarianism, it's almost always something that's happening in the US, but to a worse degree.
Right. And the social credit score program has like a 95% favorability with the Chinese people. They appreciate it. They see it as a way to promote virtue. And, I told you that I just read today the Constitution, the adjustment of the Constitution of the CPC in light of the 20th National Congress. And one of the things that they emphasize is precisely that.
Wow, the staff is running. People buying tickets over there. Oh, that's the control center over there. No police booth there. Security. That was a metro system in China, in Guiyang City, in one of China's poorest provinces. Now, the footage that you're about to see is from America's richest city. What you're about to watch is truly shocking. Brace yourselves.
Oh my god. That's the entrance. How can that be the entrance here? That looks like the entrance to hell. Oh my god. I know what you're thinking. This looks like a movie set. This is not a movie set. This is real. This is really the entrance to New York subway. Oh my god, look at the state of it. That is insane. It looks like something out of a horror movie.
And you might say, how can you blame trash on the ground on capitalism? Maybe that's just from overcrowding or whatever. But like I said, there are police in the subway stations in New York who will, beat you with a nightstick if you try and jump the turnstile. But they won't do anything about the people having mental health crises, all around you or on the floor. Because that labor costs money. And under capitalism, nobody wants to invest money in things that are for the public good. If they're not going to bring about surplus value and profit. So, they don't even want to hire a janitor. They don't want to pay someone to keep these things clean. That would cost, or that would be investing the societal surplus in something that benefits the people, that benefits the public, and that's not the goal of capitalism. It's not a society for itself. It's a society for capital. So, I mean, the resistance to spending money on labor that would serve the public good is the reason why you have, the subways that are trashed.
Madness. Oh my God. Imagine walking down. If you walk down that tunnel, that's the last walk you're ever going to make. Most of these people were never seen again. This is the tunnel to hell. You ain't coming out of this tunnel. Oh my God. What the? Oh God. Imagine the smell of it. How can it look that bad? This is America. This is the land of the free. Oh, that guy's got the right idea with the suitcase. He's like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. That guy's heading straight to the airport. Probably going to China, actually. Oh my God, what a state. I've never seen anything like it. It's crazy. What's with all this so much graffiti, trash, rubbish? You can imagine with all that trash going to be rats. Oh, the smell. I can smell it through the video. I can smell it. Probably smell like a toilet. That looks like a Burger King cup. Oh man, this is just insane. What is wrong with America's infrastructure? My goodness. Oh God, what is that coming out of the walls? Some toxic goo. Ugh. Yeah. This is crazy. God. I don't know how it can get that bad. Okay, now we're heading inside. Oh, look at the state of it. Look at the state of that. That is incredible. Oh, look at the ceiling. I mean, is that safe even? The ceiling might collapse any second.
I mean, he's stunned by it, but for Americans, this probably seems pretty normal, right? This probably isn't even that shocking. Like, the biggest city near me is Chicago, and I mean, if you go into the public areas, the public transportation doesn't look much different than this. The infrastructure just hasn't been kept up with. And I mean, like, think about all the different effects of that has. There's environmental effects, there's health effects of breathing in smog and pollution, and then just like the psychological effects of walking around surrounded by trash and garbage all the time and crumbling infrastructure, while you have these giant skyscrapers, owned by banks or, mega corporations. So there's this giant accumulation of wealth, but also this giant accumulation of filth because, the society isn't taking care of itself. And, what effect does that have on the individuals in society?
Right. And it's a society of abundance in certain areas. So there's no excuse. Like with Cuba has crumbling infrastructure, but Cuba has a blockade imposed on it by the most formidable of enemies, and the things that are not fixed, it's because they literally just do not have access to the materials necessary to fix them. So conservatives and liberals or whoever love talking about, yeah, but look at Cuba's buildings. They don't have access to fixing those things. The little bit that they're able to make, they use towards the things that are most directly connected to the public good, to healthcare, to education, and similar things, to feeding their people. But there's no excuse for the U.S. The U.S. is not under sanctions from a global imperialist power, because it is the global imperialist power. It's where the super profits of the whole world are ciphered into, and it's the richest country on the planet, and this is the experience and the atmosphere that the vast majority of its citizens have to face. And just from the level of security, I mean, we don't talk about crime often. We know crime in our context is, something that develops out of the social relations which shape materially people's needs and lives, but also the cultures that emerge out of that. But just having the tranquility to go into a train station and not feel like you're going to get assaulted, or for women, not feel like you're going to get, harassed. That's huge. In the US, how many times don't we see, women getting harassed in trains filled with people, and no one does jack. No one does anything. It's just disgusting. And that level of serenity to be able to go to a train and not just not be scared by being attacked, harassed, or whatever, but be able to even enjoy the experience, because he showed a poor place in China, one of the poorest cities. If you look at some of the richer cities in China, the tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 cities, I mean, you would go to the train just to hang out, not even to take the train. It's just insanely more beautiful than museums in the US. So it's, these comparisons, they need to be brought to light, because we still have, I believe, the American public has been led to believe that China is still this super poor country, that it's backwards, and that we're still, the richest country on the planet. And to some extent, in terms of GDP, sure, that's true. But look at the actual country, and then look at China. You'll see the difference. Anyone would. And these people that go there, they're not Marxists. They don't give a rat's ass about socialism or capitalism. They just want to live where they can live best. And they realize that is China. So when people tell us, if you love socialism so much, why don't you go to China? I mean, I would probably live more comfortably in China. But I won't, because my fight is here. I won't go back to Cuba because they already had their revolution. I won't go to China because that would be too easy. It's be living in a comfortable society where I'm guaranteed that my standard of living will continuously go up, where I'm guaranteed basic things that I need to survive, where I can live in a beautiful city that's affordable and that doesn't constantly force me to clash against the polarized character of society, where there's nice buildings and homeless people and potential crime and stuff like that. So yeah, it'd be great to live in China, but our struggle is here. But it's important to show these things, because everything China has, we can have as well if we had a socialist society. If we had workers controlling the forces of production and directing them towards social good and not towards the profits of a small group of people.
Absolutely. It reminds me actually of the presentation that I used to do like way back in the day when, you and me were still very early in our journey about urban planning, basically, and the planning of neighborhoods, and, comparing what we call the projects in the US, which are just these gray apartments stacked on top of each other, public housing, that's designed to get the highest quantity of people you can into the smallest space. And that has all these negative psychological effects, and we know what methods of urban planning are the best. We know what maximizes human happiness. It's having a lot of third places where public places where people can meet outside of their homes, having everywhere connected by sidewalks, walking or biking, rather than just a bunch of cars, and then rather than having everything be gray and concrete, you have plants, and you have what they call the biosphere. And, it's been proven time and time again that humans need to be around nature, need to be around plants, because it increases our levels of happiness. Right. So we're just totally ignoring all these things we know about urban planning in the US to continue doing everything in the most cost-effective way for the capitalist class. And it has all these horrific negative effects on humanity, on our psychology, on how we interact with each other. And, now we have a real life example of a country moving away from that, a country in China who is doing socialist urban planning. And the first time I read Capital, I ended up buying a copy for my brother who's studying engineering. And, city design and city planning is like civil engineering. But I was just thinking he has to read this, because he's thinking about, how to plan cities, and how they can be better designed. It's like anybody who's involved in that needs to grasp Marxism and grasp how capitalism prevents us from having urban planning that makes sense.
And that's one of the emphasis that China is putting in its development, which is to make it green. Which in cities, the way that that's experienced is by having a bunch of greenery. by having balconies that allow people to have plants, and by having a lot of parks. And when I was living down with my parents, they had just for the summer they had just opened up a small park in Miami with like art and murals, and it was a lot of greenery, a lot of different types of plants, and I was going over there to walk every day, and it was such a leveling experience. You spend your whole day working, and then you're able to take a walk and see these nice greeneries and see some art, and you know something like that. That's very rare for that to have happened in Miami, but something like that's just the norm in China. There's a few of those in every city, and it's just a beautiful place to just walk around. By the way, I sent you a comparison he recently did with China and India, and I think it would be good to watch because they both obtained independence around the same time, and they were
Right.
both in very similar economic conditions. And he compares their trains. He also has some digs at the U.S. He always takes jabs at the U.S. But he shows a train station there that it's much more developed than the one in his town. I think he moved places actually, but um, I mean the comparison is there to make. You're looking at a train station in one of China's poorest cities being incredibly superior to the train station in the richest place in the U.S. And I made a pretty audacious tweet a few months ago, which was that some of China's poorest cities are a hell of a lot better than the richest cities in America. And I think if anyone actually engages with these videos or goes themselves, they would come to a similar conclusion.
Absolutely, I agree. One of the we could probably move on from that specific video and go to the India one or go to one about the Chinese apartments. But one of like the starkest contrasts between the U.S. and China, and this relates to the the having more greenery and biosphere in the urban planning, is the People's Liberation Army in China has been planting giant forests, actually, that covers as much square footage as the country of Ireland. So while our military has been waging these imperialist, murderous wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, all around the world, Libya, Syria, China's military has been planting forests. They've been combating deforestation, combating climate change, and like I said, allowing for more biosphere and greenery in their urban areas, which is good for human development and human happiness. It's truly, a society that's working for itself, a society for itself rather than a society for capital. Our military works for the sake of capital. China's military works for the sake of their people, and for the sake of their further development. So I don't know, Carlos, it's up to you. Would you rather play, or let us know in the chat if you have a preference? Would you rather play the comparison of China and India's trains, or do you want to move on to the apartment tour in China so we can learn about a different aspect of their infrastructure?
Whatever the chat prefers. I mentioned the India one because the starkness of the comparison is much more pronounced because he's looking at a more developed train station. I believe that's the one where there's certain levels and you see like a gallery and a zoo, and it's just incredible to think about that being what a train station looks like. But yeah, we have people here saying the apartment. There was a comment above that was like, when the video started freezing, someone said capitalist internet, and if we look at the apartment one of the things that we'll see is that that's a true statement, because the speed at which the internet goes in China is like almost twice as fast as in the US. I'm not a big tech guy, but in terms of numbers, I remember I watched this video with my sister, and she's like, "Oh my God, I have like one of the fastest this, and that's like twice as much as mine." So yeah, I'm good with watching the apartment one next.
Sounds good. Yeah, capitalist internet is terrible, and they freaking nickel and dime you every way they can.
And welcome back to another video. If you're new to the channel, then my name is Jason, aka Humbo. And this is Lincoln. Lincoln, what do you have to say to everyone? Okay, so welcome to my new apartment. Well, it's not actually my apartment, we're just renting it. So we're going to give you a tour around. We are currently, where are we, Lincoln? Where are we? Lincoln, where are we? We're on the balcony. So let's take a look at the balcony first.
Okay, Lincoln's in the car. Right, so this is the balcony. This was a newly furnished apartment that we're renting for 25,000 RMB for the year. Let's just have a look. Got a nice view of a river down there. Let's take a look inside. It is a 3-bedroom. Yeah. It is a 3-bedroom apartment. Sorry about the mess. I haven't cleaned up. There's Lincoln. Let me just squeeze past the cot here. 3-bedroom apartment. This is the master bedroom with ensuite, Western toilet there. Bedroom is a little bit tight when you're trying to squeeze past if you've got a cot there, but I would say it's pretty nice. Not bad. Lincoln likes it. We've got a mosquito net on there that also acts as a bed guard for when Lincoln's in there. Then we have 2 more bedrooms here. This place is about 120 square meters. I deeply apologize about the mess. Why is everywhere like open? I would like to say that we've only just moved in here, but we've been here about a month. Oh no, another room missing. Look at the state. Why the cupboards? Jow opened all the doors and cupboards to get rid of the new decorations now. So we don't actually use these rooms, as you can see. It's just kind of used as a wardrobe, really. Then if we come down here, you have another toilet. You've got a sink, mirror. The mirror has a little light on and heated. It's pretty nice. So as I said, this whole place was already newly decorated by the landlord. Let's just step in here. There seems to be a dog in my toilet. So here we have the squat toilet. And also you have another shower here that you want to use. It's a bit of a weird design. You walk through the toilet into a laundry kind of area. And there's another dog here. Some kind of grumpy, some kind of very stinky.
This is so cool. I only ever get to see places like this with some of those features like the buttons on the mirrors when we travel for wrestling and happen to stay in a nicer hotel. Really, that's the only place I've seen something like this, when we happen to stay in a bigger city. And we can only get into a nicer hotel because it's closer to the venue or whatever. Like, American apartments do not look like this, especially not in the freaking Midwest. I mean, maybe if you're talking like upper end apartments in New York or on the coast, but I don't know a single place in the Midwest that looks anything like this.
My wife and I were sick for like 2 years straight because of how bad the apartment that we had in Dubuque was. We were getting constant mold, and it was a 2-bedroom apartment that we were paying $600 for, and that's extremely cheap. Now the one that I live in, it's 2 bedrooms, and because it's in a different city, it's like $1,300 a month, which when you compare it to this, it's insane. But it got so bad that like I would take off my shirt from baseball and put it to dry, and it would get mold while I was taking a shower, and I would come back, it would have mold. And so the only way, after months and even a year of telling the landlord about this, the only way he ended up doing something was when I threatened to sue him. I had talked to one of the teachers that I had that was also a lawyer, and they told me that I could sue for that. So I threatened to sue him, and then he came and took out the rug and fixed some stuff, and he ended up jacking up the rent like $100 after doing that. But it's insane that those sorts of apartments, all those big buildings that you see, a lot of them are apartments like that, and it's just where working people live. So, I mean, just the idea of being able to have a decent job, to go to a nice home like that, to relax, and to have a society that when you go out, you have all these activities that you can do in your free time. Some connected to just pleasure and enjoyment, others connected to human flourishing and different things that you could do to develop yourself in an affordable fashion. It's just It's the fruits and the niceties of the first, what they call the first stage of socialism.
For sure. I mean, I could tell landlord stories forever. I had this landlord in college who's notorious in the town we lived in. He owns like over 60 homes, and then he owns 2 other businesses as well. I looked up all his financials once, but our washing machine broke and he fixed it, and then, you know, it broke again. And he said, if it breaks a third time, you guys have to pay for it. Like, there's no way that's legal. It says on the lease, you know, that you have to pay for the washing machine. You have to provide a working washing machine. We didn't do anything to make it break. And he did other things like try and keep us stuck on our lease, or, you know, one of our roommates bailed on us, and we were trying to find a subleaser, but the landlord didn't want us to do that. So he was just trying to increase the rent payment like $150 a month for the people who were still left at the house. There's just a couple stories, but and for advice, like, try and find a tenants union, or like threaten to sue them, like Carlos said. Because when I said, you know, no, it says in the lease this, this, and this, you know, he did back down. You know, he knew he was just trying to swindle us, but they'll just try and swindle you. You know, they'll hope you're an agreeable person who's not going to call them on this, or you're just trying to be a nice guy. And, you know, like a lot of working people, like, honestly, my parents are kind of like this. They're a little bit naive about, you know, folks like landlords, and they just want to be nice sometimes. And then, you know, that'll allow these people to super exploit you, versus this guy is living in this apartment for $300, which I see people are freaking stunned about in the chat. Same here. That place that I lived at, where the landlord was going to make me pay for my own washer and dryer, was, I don't know, $350 a month for 4 people to live in one house, $350 each, which is pretty cheap compared to a lot of places. But yeah, it's wild.
Abolish NATO says there was a gas leak in my basement, and the landlord said the batteries in the CO detector just needed to be replaced. Almost died.
Oh my gosh.
French bulldog, washing machine there, window looking out onto the river down there. And then through there you can see the kitchen, so let's just head back through now. That's my dog Mona Lisa, and this is Winston, who is a poodle, and he's going mental at the moment because he can sense there's a storm coming. Just calm down, it's not going to do anything, just calm down. We can't give him like a comfy bed or mat or anything, because he just destroys it, so you tear it to 1,000 pieces. Anyway, so that's their place, and that's just temporary anyway, because I have an announcement at the end of this video, so stick around. So then you come into the living room area. What's on the TV? Oh, Lincoln's got his cartoons on. Nice big couch. And you've got Lincoln's bouncy thing, and then his play area. Just look at the state of it, all the toys. Nice big window. This was an open balcony, but a lot of people in China, they decide to close off the balcony, I guess because they've already got that balcony across there. So they only wanted one, you know. I probably would have kept it open, but you get a bit of extra room if you close it off. And just spotted someone over there decided to...
I know this is people's houses and people's, you know, their personal sort of living spaces. But again, look at all the greenery like we were talking about. You know, this is not really something that exists in the American cities. Maybe, you know, you'll have flowers on the balcony or whatever, but there's all this greenery. It's all just looks really well designed and you know, well put together, efficiently planned. Yeah, it's wild. Is there a comparison to American apartments in this or not?
No.
We could probably just call it here. I think people get the gist, but those are
great
videos.
Atomic Punk is right, though. We have freedom. So
right. I failed to consider that.
Yeah.
We have we have freedom in human nature, so why would we want nice apartments? That goes against our nature as humans. We like to actually live in our own shit.
Right.
People's Republic, not Black Rocks. I like that.
There's a question here. I don't know if you want to address it, which I think it's good. A more forward-oriented question, like what do like what do we do? What is to be done? There's a lot of tenants organizations that you can be involved in. Um, those might produce like small scale victories, which are important for people struggling on an everyday basis. I was just recently in a meeting for an organization that I'm a part of that shared like a script that you can use basically to guarantee that if you're trying to get evicted or something, you can't. Um, so there's a few things you could do, but I think that at the end of the day, that none of this is going to change until the working class grabs power of the state, and how that looks and the steps that need to be taken for it. Um, I don't think we can have a neat blueprint for that. We can look at how it's worked in other places. We can, assess according to the similarities in context whether similar uh, steps ought to be taken. But I think it's a creative endeavor that requires a constant, concrete study of your context, the place that you're in, and strategies that need to be adjusted. I think regionally, the U.S. is such a large place, and you can't just take a copy paste approach. What works in New York might not work in the South, and it might not work in the Midwest. So,
Yeah, and to comment on specific conditions now, like one of the things I know, it never really got going, but one of the things some of the CPUSA chapters were trying to do in Iowa was organize tenants against the utility companies, because the cost of utilities is through the roof. People can't afford to heat their homes, and right now it's directly related to the US's proxy war against Russia, the US and NATO's sanctions against Russia and Russian energy, which is leading to a cost of living crisis in Europe especially, but now the US. Personally, our utility bills went up over $100 last month after going up over $70 the month before. It's skyrocketing, and I looked it up. This is the case all across America. So if you're going to be organizing tenants or tenants unions, don't forget about the utility companies. You can organize people against landlords, of course, always. But utility companies are really, really ripping people off. It's such a scam, Wi-Fi included. They're just charging you out the wazoo unnecessarily for basic necessities. And then our government is actively not only, sending money that could be used to make utilities cheaper to weapons in Ukraine, but enforcing these sanctions that are making it, much more difficult for us to get energy, for us to get the commodities necessary for heating our homes and things like that. So it's a direct result of imperialism, these economic hardships that are coming, and hitting the working class within the imperial core. So yeah, I think that's always good. It's always good to point out the way imperialism leads to economic hardship in the imperial core, because imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, because they're deeply intertwined.
as far as the second part of the question, the building the party part, I think that we're in a stage of networking, in a very embryonic stage in the struggle. We do have objective conditions, which I think are pretty ripe. We do even have some subjective conditions that look favorable. We have a big portion of the American population that is against, the two-party duploys, in favor of third parties. About maybe 20%, last time I checked, of the population is in favor of what Congress is doing. There's discontent in the way that governance has taken place, and this is something that has been constant over the last 10 or so years. So I feel like people are open to socialist ideas, especially younger people, which, poll after poll shows that more than half of them would vote for like a socialist candidate. So it's a matter of reaching the masses, of focusing on just the core issues that affect people's everyday life. And I think that we're at a very embryonic stage in the struggle, where we need to organize a strong labor movement. We need to do a lot of community work, and that requires, I think, overcoming certain flaws that prevent some socialist organizations from doing that successfully. But I think ultimately it's gonna, if the last 50 years has taught us anything, is that you can have something like a vanguard party, but if you do it through elections, coalitions are going to be something that might be necessary. I know at least in Latin America, the socialist governments that have came to power, it's been through coalitions of social movements, unions, and various progressive socialist parties. That might be the case in the U.S. Again, I don't know. You know, there's no blueprint for what's going to end up working, what's not. The only thing that we can be sure of is that people are open to talking about socialism, and that that we should reach them with something concrete. Because, you know, okay, you get them to agree with the ideas, what then? And that's the, you know, the importance of building organizations and of having plans for what to do at the level of the community, the level of workplaces, at the, you know, and then branching out towards regions and then the country. So
Absolutely, that's a good explanation. Are you running out of steam here, Carlos, or do you want to quick watch this 1 minute 17-second video of Zelensky talking about how Ukraine is a big business opportunity for U.S. corporations?
yeah, let's watch it.
All right, let's do it. Oops.
It is obvious that American business can become the locomotive that will once again push forward global economic growth. We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants of the international financial and investment world as BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs. Such American brands as Starlink or Westinghouse have already become part of our Ukrainian way. Your brilliant defense systems, such as HIMARS or Bradleys, are already uniting our history of freedom with your enterprises. We are waiting for Patriots. We are looking closely at Abrams. Thousands of such examples are possible, and everyone can become a big business by working with Ukraine in all sectors, from weapons and defense to construction, from communication to agriculture, from transport to IT, from banks to medicine. And I believe that freedom must always win.
Freedom must always win. Freedom for BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Starlink. I hope people caught what he was saying there. I know he has a thick accent, but literally saying the quiet part out loud. You know, basically, he might as well hold up Lenin's imperialism from 1917 and just say, read this and you'll understand what's going on in Ukraine. Western finance capital, big business, the owner of Starlink, Elon Musk, you know, who you could consider maybe an industrial capitalist or a tech capitalist, teaming up with the finance capitalists, the big banks like JP Morgan Chase, to try and do whatever they want in Ukraine, to try and, you know, turn Ukraine into a playground for oligarchs, for corporations and capitalists, and, you know, continue using Ukraine to fight this war against Russia. Zelensky starts out this speech by saying, once again, you know, we think that the U.S. can push global economic growth, meaning, you know, maintain their dominance, their hegemony over these countries like Russia and China, who have been developing and, you know, overtaking the U.S. as the global economic superpower. And he's essentially laying out what this whole thing is about, you know, what this is all about for Western finance capitalists and for NATO, you know, taking Russia and China down a peg, you know, trying to hinder their economic growth and their development and maintain U.S. unipolar geopolitical dominance. I mean, that's what it's all for. And it's being driven by these finance capitalists who he just mentioned by name. And you have people like Aaron Mate brought this up because they reacted to this on the Jimmy Dore show a while back. Aaron Mate said, so these folks like Bernie Sanders, they can criticize BlackRock, they can criticize JP Morgan Chase, they can criticize these finance capitalists all day long, or the AOCs of the world. But then when it comes to the US NATO proxy war in Ukraine, they're all on board, right? They take the exact same position as BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase and the finance capitalists. So when it comes to imperialism and capitalist imperialism, which is capitalism in its highest stage, the Social Democrats are all on board with it, right? They refuse to criticize NATO at all. And they're totally backing the imperialist project of Western finance capital in East Europe.
And that's why it's so important that we criticize all these self-proclaimed progressives and socialists. There's a certain sector of people within the communist movement that get mad when you spend a big chunk of your energy criticizing the hegemonic left, the AOCs and the DSA progressives within the Democratic Party. But you have to, because you know what to expect from neocons, you know what to expect from neoliberals. But at a time when a big portion of the population is discontent, it's looking for alternatives, when there's a genuine crisis of legitimacy, I think there was a lag there. There's a genuine crisis of legitimacy, and you have this portion of mainstream politics that presents itself as an alternative form of politics just go down with the mainstream, especially on these issues of substance. That must be criticized very harshly, because there's a different standard through which you have to judge people who call themselves socialist or democratic socialists or whatever. It's just ridiculous. And unfortunately, it's something that has infiltrated the communist movement and communist organizations who continue to think that somehow by voting not just for these progressives that are okay with sending $100 billion to fascist Ukraine, but with their party, even the more quote-unquote centrist parts of that party, somehow an idea has arisen that by following that path, you're going to actually be able to fight against fascism in the U.S. The sort of mental gymnastics that you have to do to come to that conclusion that, the people spearheading the funding of neo-Nazis and sending them $100 billion and, chanting Slava Ukraini, that those people are going to be the vanguard in a coalition to fight against fascism. I mean, the sorts of delusions that you have to hold, especially when those segments of U.S. politics which you consider to be fascist are funded by those same people you claim to be in a coalition with fighting against fascism. So I think that that angle, I haven't seen the Jimmy Dore clip with Aaron Mate, but it's important to call out the left in this issue, perhaps more than those parts of mainstream neoliberal and neoconservative politics that are just doing what we expect them to do.
Yeah, there was a comment earlier, and I had it starred. I should have left it. I had it set for us to respond to later on, but I removed it on accident. But it asked us, do you think there's a possibility of the U.S. becoming fully fascist? And, fascism's a term that's loosely defined. But one thing I've been saying a lot lately is don't assume that the conservatives, the Republican Party, are the only party that can be fascistic or that can act, as fascist. I mean, look what the Democratic Party is doing. Look what the Social Democrats are doing, cheering on neo-Nazis in Ukraine, sending them arms, sending them weapons, refusing to criticize the finance capitalists doing it, which is, the best definition of fascism, in my opinion, is finance capital, using violence and bigotry and hatred to maintain capitalism in a time of crisis, which is exactly what the Western finance capitalists are trying to do, while social democrats like AOC and Bernie cheer it on. And even the most left members of the Democratic Party are cheering this on. And they're doing it as you have the Atlantic Council, which is basically a mouthpiece for the military industrial complex, publishing articles like this, like literally saying the quiet part out loud as loudly as you possibly could. Zelensky wants to turn Ukraine into a big Israel. Here's a roadmap. So Israel, a state in constant warfare, a settler colonial project, a constant source of money for the military-industrial complex, who sell Israel billions of dollars of weapons a year, or who get billions of dollars a year from the U.S. government, who facilitate the shipment of arms to Israel, so they can have their own neo-colonial outpost. And now they want to do that with Ukraine, right? They want to turn it into a completely like a corporatocracy as far as their economy, totally trickle-down neoliberal economy. Basically maintain an apartheid against Russian people, similar to the apartheid in Israel, ban Russian speakers, continue to wage a war on the Donbass, and give power to these fascists, similar to the Zionist fascists in Israel. So the Democratic Party is cheering on fascism. The Democratic Party is arming fascism. So the idea that only one party in this country, or only Trump, in this country could be fascistic or have fascistic tendencies, I think is ridiculous. You could define the U.S. as fascist right now under Joe Biden.
It's this incorrect and anti-dialectical attempt to separate foreign policy from national policy. And when the state that has developed because of, as a reflection of capitalist imperialism, when the state that has developed is an imperialist state, you can't separate, what's done outside from what's done inside. It's an integral state, and you have to look at it together. And if the Democrats are the vanguard in funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine, you can say, yeah, but at home they stand for LGBTQ rights, and you can't do that. I don't know if you've seen, but there was the other day I saw this protest of certain Ukrainians. They were burning the Russian flag and the LGBTQ flag. It's like, where's your wokeness there? It seems like it's only certain the segment of the left is only really woke when it comes to the countries that are being targeted by imperialism, because they exist outside of the sphere of influence of empire. So you can't separate what's being done internationally from what's being done at home. You have definitely fascistic forces, because what you have is a decaying, senile capitalist imperialism, and that's when fascism emerges. It emerges in times of crisis, in the same way that the best soil for a socialist transformation comes about in times of crisis. The same case is true for fascism. And you don't fight that by allying with the forces that are perpetuating it. You fight that by using your immense resources to organize for socialism and to pull people away, especially people who are becoming discontent with the existing order, with what they see as an alternative, which really isn't an alternative. It's just a different way of having more of the same, which is, the fascistic forces. So I think it's something that has been thought about completely incorrectly by the left. And it's a separation of national and international politics when you can't do that. And it's also just avoiding questions. If you genuinely think the most conservative elements of the Republican Party are fascistic, and that the MAGA movement is fascistic, how is the solution voting for the Democrats, which they've literally admitted that they fund those candidates that are the most far right in the Republican Party? That's no longer hidden. It's been proven that that's the case. So if you can't see that there's a yin and yang here at play in order to perpetuate the established order, where the Democrats need the Republicans and the Republicans need the Democrats, you're not going to escape it. And you're taking a moment that could genuinely produce a revolutionary moment, and you're ruining it. You're ruining it because you're asking people to participate in more of the same. And it's just a tragedy. It's a genuine tragedy, because there's so much potential today that's unfulfilled, and it's an incorrect analysis of fascism, because it just takes fascism to be whatever it's conservative, and that's not what fascism is. Fascism is finance capital coming in moments of crisis as a reactionary force. It's driven by finance capital and it's reactionary. And the word reactionary, again, they just say, oh, reactionary just means conservative. No, it's not. When Joe Biden strikes down the workers trying to pull a strike, and when the progressives who call themselves socialists within the Democratic Party stand for a bill that's being imposed on workers, that's reactionary. From the Marxist point of view of what reaction means, that's reactionary. That's fighting against the democratic rights of workers. And that's spearheaded in part by finance capital, which is a large shareholder of these rail industries in which the strikes were potentially going to take place. So that's fascism. By the definition of, by the Marxist definition of fascism, that's fascism.
Absolutely. I like the concept or the idea that you laid out about separating foreign policy and domestic policy is undialectical, right? And I think that's something I'll probably use in my geopolitical analysis going forward. I mean, something we talk about all the time, but I've never described it like that. But earlier I was talking about the cost of living that's going up due to the sanctions on Russia and the inability to import, commodities that produce energy from Russia, and how this is making it very difficult for European workers and American workers to heat their homes and pay for utilities. So because imperialism is the stage of capitalism that we're in, all of these foreign policies are going to come back and affect us domestically, especially in this time of imperialist decay, which is one of my favorite chapters in Lenin's Imperialism, one that's often overlooked, about the decay of imperialism. And if you look at the state of our society with just everything we've been talking about today, whether it be the cost of living combined with the massive inflation or the decaying of public infrastructure, the lack of ability to afford housing, then you have like in the US, things like these mass school shootings that are happening all across the country. And, to tie the connection between foreign policy and domestic policy even tighter, there was a recent shooting that was inspired by the Azov battalion, a white supremacist shooter in the US with ties to the Azov in Ukraine, as Nancy Pelosi is, like you said, yelling Slava Ukraini, and AOC and Bernie are telling us how we need to keep sending, using all our tax dollars to send more weapons over there. So everything we're doing in terms of foreign policy is accelerating the decay of capitalism, and it is such a mess right now. It is in such a state of decay, and we need to stay, I think, focused and pointed with our analysis, and like you said, not offer people the same solutions or lack thereof more correctly. And offers people something new, actually offer people a socialist future, a socialist way forward, not just relying on one day the Democrats to come save us. Like, it's been proven so many times now that that's not going to happen. The Justice Democrat strategy of electing enough, good Democrats is not going to work, because good Democrats don't exist. If they do exist, they turn on you as soon as they get in Washington. So we need a party of the workers, by the workers, for the workers, of the workers, not of the petty bourgeois political careerists like AOC.
Absolutely.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. You couldn't have said it any better. And it's been a long stream and it's late at night, so the point I was going to make is kind of slipping. I'm trying to see if I can reel it back in, and no, I don't think I can.
No worries. It's been a great stream. Sorry, do you have something to
say? Yeah.
Go ahead.
That there's a really good quote from Glenn Ford. He was the editor and the main person in Black Agenda Report, and he says that, whereas some people think that the Democrats are the lesser of two evils, what they actually are is the more efficient evil. With the Democrats, you're able to get shafted a lot easier. I mean, just imagine if this escalation into a condition where the doomsday clock is the closest it's been to midnight. And I don't know if you want to pull the article up real quick.
Oh, yeah.
it's 90 seconds to midnight. This was achieved. Of course, it's a long history, going back to at least 2013. Again, Obama administration and the activities that were taking place in Ukraine. But uh, this catastrophic moment that we're in was achieved in large part, most directly, by Democratic administration. So where has the outrage been? All we see from communist organizations and forces, and I think it's very clear, who it is that I'm talking about, is more of the same outrage and Trump derangement syndrome of the last of 2-3 years ago. And it is absolutely criminal in the condition that we're in, where the Democrats are the forces, along with the Republicans. I'm not saying the other side is better, but the Democrats, along with the Republicans, are the force leading us towards, possibly nuclear Armageddon. To have communists ally with these people and say that they're in coalitions with this group of people in order to fight fascism. It's like saying, I think it was Jenny who said it in the chat, we're going to ally with fascists to fight the fascists. It makes no fucking sense. The only way that it can make sense is if you're absolutely delusional about the existing forces operating in U.S. politics. So the Democrats are not, the lesser of two evils. They're the sort of evil which can continue more of the same while you are able to daze off. They're more effective because you focus on them a whole lot less than the more glaring evil of the Republicans. But that doesn't make them less evil. It just makes them more efficient at what they're doing, the more nefarious form of evil.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I feel like a lot of people haven't truly grasped. A lot of people are blinded by what we could call Trump derangement syndrome still. And then a lot of people really haven't grasped what Russiagate was. A lot of people bought into Russiagate because, so-called left-wing media voices, people like Sam Cedar, whoever else, were promoting this narrative, as well as the liberal corporate media. But once you know that Russiagate was BS and there was never any evidence that, Russia helped Trump win the election over Hillary Clinton or infiltrated our elections and, was running Trump like a Manchurian candidate. Once you learn or look into these claims and see that there's no evidence for them, it all starts to make sense. It makes a lot more sense. What did the Democrats do under Obama in 2014? They overthrew the Ukrainian government because they wanted to start waging a proxy war against Russia. Then in 2016, Hillary Clinton, who was in Obama's administration from that wing of the Democratic Party, was the Democrats' candidate. And her plan was to continue this proxy war, continue the U.S. and NATO's imperialist project in Ukraine. But she was such an unpopular, evil witch of a candidate that she lost to a dumbass reality TV show star painting himself orange. And so they had to... One, Hillary couldn't take the blame for losing that election. She had to put it on someone else because she's a narcissist. And two, it allowed them to demonize Russia for the next 4 years. Russia hacked our elections. Russia's evil. Russia's out to get us. Russia's the reason we have Trump. Basically turning every liberal in this country, or every person who was appalled by the actions and behavior of Donald Trump, against Russia for 4 years straight. Boom, Joe Biden gets in office and the proxy war continues. And NATO starts training troops on Russia's border. And they're continually floating the idea of adding Ukraine to NATO, making Ukraine's military interoperable with NATO, doing all these things that Russia said was a red line. Doing all these things that Russia said, if you do this, we are going to do a military operation in response. So the U.S. wanted to continue their imperial project in 2016, or rather the Democrats, the Democratic establishment, but they weren't able to because they fumbled the election to this goofball. But when you look at it like that, it's a lot different than the people with Trump derangement syndrome who think Trump was the worst American president ever and he's just this anomaly, this horrible, horrible thing. Look at what the Democrats were doing despite Trump, or look at, what Trump accidentally got in the way of the Democrats doing. This horrific, murderous imperialist project using Ukrainian people as cannon fodder and dumping arms and weapons into extremist nationalists in their country.
Absolutely. And it's I mean, the psychological operation that they have waged with the whole, Russian collusion thing has just been, it's been a work of art. How they got people who, 15 years ago were maybe anti-war to be the biggest cheerleaders of war, of this, potentially nuclear Armageddon that we're getting ourselves into. And it was all planned. Like, we know, thanks to Angela Merkel and other sources, that the whole point of the West's engagement in the Minsk agreements was to buy time in order to militarize Ukraine so that the proxy war against Russia wouldn't end in a week with Russia just, winning. It's lasted this long because they've had, since 2014, they've had 8 years, 9 now, where they've been building up the military capacities in Ukraine. And they were very clear that they never wanted peace. What they've always wanted is time. They wanted to buy time to build up Ukraine so that it could be as successful as possible as an outpost to wage a proxy war against Russia. And in the U.S., in order to develop legitimacy for this war, the ground was set with Trump derangement syndrome, and a big portion of that, which was the Russia collusion thesis, which had no evidence at all. And it was a country which colludes in the elections of almost every country on the planet, talking about how a country, on baseless accusations, is colluding with its own elections. I mean, for God's sakes, the U.S. colluded in the U.S.'s election more than Russia. You want to talk about real collusion? Look at what the Democratic Party did to Bernie Sanders in 2016. That's real collusion. The journalist that exposed it, he's in jail now. And he's been in prison for a while. So it's an absurd country where war criminals walk around freely, and the people who expose them are sentenced to jail.
Truly. And we watched a video that was a great example of that the other day with Stella Assange, the wife of Julian Assange, confronting John Bolton.
Mm-hmm.
This murderous war criminal, horrific human being. And he had no argument. She explained how Julian Assange is being charged with the Espionage Act, with which no journalist has ever been charged with, because it doesn't allow you to bring a public defense argument to trial. You can't say I needed to release this information, or these videos of the U.S. gunning down civilians in a military helicopter, or rigging the elections against candidates who are democratically supported by the people. This is what Julian Assange exposed. And John Bolton is just comfortable getting on TV and saying to Julian's wife, oh, he should be locked up forever. He should get the maximum penalty. And then Assange's wife explains how that doesn't make any sense legally. And Bolton's like, well, he threatened our freedom. He just falls back on these old absurd talking points. But that's the absurdity of the society we live in. It's the absurdity of imperialist capitalism, where you have the most murderous, horrific war criminals in the world, like John Bolton, Henry Kissinger, and George Bush. And they're, not just walking around free, but they're rich, getting paid a bunch of money for speaking engagements, as if, they have anything of value to say.
Or Obama, who took us from 2 to 8 wars, who's waged the most criminal bombing campaigns, drone bombing campaigns this planet has seen, received a Nobel Peace Prize. The prize of the Nobel Peace Prize went to the guy who has dropped the most bombs than anyone else. So it's if you want to understand the contradictions at play, I think that's a good way to look at it. But I think most people are waking up to it, and they're waking up in different ways. Some people, unfortunately, because of the way that algorithms take, they end up going down the conspiracy theory route and towards weird places. Other people end up waking up in a way that I think is more helpful, the path from social democracy to socialism and eventually Marxism, Leninism. But it is the case that for the vast majority of people, they feel like things should not keep going on in the same way that they have in the past. And it's criminal at this point to not, as a communist, as someone conscious about the existing state of affairs, to not dedicate every ounce of your energy to organizing these people, to talking to them, and to, functioning as a, specifically today with the proxy war against Russia, as a voice of peace. There's a very famous Julian Assange quote, which is that if war can be started with lies, peace can be started with truth. And part of what we're trying to do here is a genuine peace movement, which requires us to understand how the whole blame for this whole affair is to be placed on the U.S. And NATO forces and on their collaborators, which are largely Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, we literally had a vote. Let me see if I still have the picture here attached. I had the picture attached. Yeah. We had a vote on to combat the glorification of Nazism and neo-Nazism, and 52 countries voted against it. So, whereas before it was two, the U.S. and Israel, and the U.S., Ukraine, and sometimes Israel, this year it was 52 countries who said, we shouldn't ban people glorifying Nazism. What does that tell you? Well, that they're very much aware of the fact that the people who they are supporting in Ukraine are Nazis. If they didn't think these people were Nazis, why would they vote against something trying to ban the glorification of Nazism? So it's there's no way around the truth being on the side that we have been trying to put. But of course, the way that algorithms work is that those that are perpetuating the lies will get millions and millions of views, and we will be lucky if we get a few thousand.
For now. Yeah, that was really well said. I like that Assange quote. Yeah, this has been a great stream. Feel like we got a lot of good chat interaction and a lot of good discussions about a range of different issues, politics, philosophical. Yes, before we leave, everybody, please check out the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2. It is here. It is on paperback and ebook. It is available on our website via the link that I'm sending you all right now. It's beautiful and shiny and has an analysis of American healthcare from me, and analysis of the conditions in America and the revolutionary way forward from Carlos, and a whole bunch more. I haven't even read all the articles in there yet myself.
An interview with Chomsky.
Chomsky interview. I gotta remember to keep bringing that up because it's a kind of a big deal. So.
It is, yeah. There's a lot of good articles, and it really tries to approach U.S. history in a way that's not very common in the left, which is to make the claim that goes completely against what many communists today think and what McCarthyism wanted the American people to believe, which is that the U.S. has no revolutionary history. We're going completely against that, and we're showing in the whole second half of the journal the revolutionary history that we have and how far back it goes. And that's really the spirit of the journal. And the first half we have social analysis, which combines some of this and tries to do this today. But the second half of the journal really deals with different movements and labor struggles and different figures that have fought for socialism in the US. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. The struggle for socialism at the most concrete everyday level requires the building of community, and you can't build community without a shared understanding of the past and a shared understanding of where it is that you would like to move forward to. And what we're trying to do here is a process of building community, of reestablishing the legacy of socialist and progressive struggles in the U.S. and of having those function as a sort of historical legs for our movement today. Is very much different approaching the question of socialism in the U.S. with the attitude that everything the U.S. has done in the past and the American people have done, everything is condemnable. There's no revolutionary past. It's just everything is evil. It's very different using that attitude to approach socialist organizing, to using the attitude that we have a very rich legacy of socialist struggles and progressive struggles, that you can trace them back all the way to the founding of the country, and that it has been the capitalist class who wants to divorce our working class from its rich progressive history. We're not going to let that happen, which is something that unfortunately we see happening today. It's something that in the Marxist-Leninist tradition is called national nihilism. When you believe that there's nothing from your national past that's worth recuperating in the struggle for socialism, it's very prominent in parts of the communist left. It's not at all prominent in our organization, and we wish to wage a struggle against that form of national nihilism, which is a fetter towards, one, the acquisition of truth and a truthful and dialectical understanding of America's history, but also towards a fetter towards the struggle for socialism.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better way to explain it myself. Check it out, y'all. Tell us what you think. Let us know on any of the social media platforms we're on what you think of it. Criticisms, compliments, recommendations, anything. We want to hear your feedback and know that people are digging into the journal, because we put a lot of time into it and we think it's pretty valuable. So yeah, and shout out to our Patreon supporters. Without y'all, the streams that we do would be impossible, and the journals would be absolutely impossible. And also, $10 ebooks, ebooks are now available for all $10 patrons. So if you subscribe to our Patreon, there's a link there with the PDF for $10 subs only. So now we have a real sort of reward for those of you behind that paywall that you'll get no matter what. So we're happy to offer that to our patrons, because you all do a lot for us, obviously, and we are reliant on you. Got demonetized from TikTok recently, so they're constantly clipping our wings in that aspect. So really rely on the Patreon. So solidarity with all our patrons, solidarity with all our viewers, our moderators, supporters of Midwestern Marx. Appreciate y'all more than I can really even say. And thanks for hanging out with us tonight in the stream.
Absolutely. And you can find in the same place where the link that Eddie sent, or if not, in midwesternmarx.com/books, you can find our other books. We published 4 books last year, and we have about a dozen that we're set to publish this year. So it's a very exciting part of our institute, and check it out. We have the ebook of my book, The Anthology on Dialectical Materialism, coming out pretty soon as well. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you very much for sticking with us for 2 hours and 41 minutes now. And I hope you enjoyed the topics discussed. If you have a chance, or you're familiar with how Twitch works, we welcome people clipping parts of our stream so that we can share them on YouTube and on social media. That would be extremely helpful. So, if you want to help us out, and maybe financially you can't do it, clipping parts of our streams so that we can then share them, it would be a tremendous way to help the Midwestern Marx Institute. So,
absolutely, we spend a lot of time editing. So, all right, with that, we will see y'all on the next stream. Solidarity.
See you, folks. Take care. Good night.